This episode is brought to you by AT&T, the network that helps Americans make connections. When you compare, there's no comparison. AT&T. Economist Justin Wolfers thinks we need to preface today's show about long-awaited tariff arguments at the Supreme Court with a warning. You see, Justin is not a lawyer. Like, really, not.
I try to talk to lawyers as little as possible. I started law school once. I was terrible at it. I've met lawyers at dinner parties. I don't really like them. And I've gone over to law school and all they do is argue with each other.
And yet today you were pressed into service because...
By you. Just for the listeners, Mary called me and said, could you listen to this? And I told her I'm the worst lawyer in North America.
But he agreed to do it anyway, friends.
I listened to the arguments and became even more glad I'm not a lawyer.
Justin says that because as an economist, he's very clear-eyed about what a tariff is.
I teach tariffs. I know what a tariff is. I wrote a textbook.
At this point, Justin is feeling around on the shelf behind him.
The textbook's right here. The tariff is defined as a tax on imports.
He is sounding agitated here because one of the central arguments President Trump's attorneys seemed to be making yesterday is that a tariff is in fact not a tax. Taxes, you see, are levied by Congress, not the president.
The government's lawyer said, well, we don't need a delegation of the power to tax because this is a regulatory tariff, not a revenue tariff.
They were saying the revenue gathering here is incidental.
By the way, the president's boasting how much revenue he's raising. By the way, much of the case he made for this was about revenue. And I listened to this argument and I took it totally seriously for about 10 minutes. And then I remembered I have never heard of the word regulatory tariff. It doesn't exist.
Watching these arguments, it seemed to me things didn't go great for the government.
Oh, they went bad.
It seemed like the conservatives were pretty skeptical.
Let's just say they went bad. There is a prediction market called Kalshi, where literally you can buy a security that'll pay $1 if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Trump's tariffs. So as of 10 a.m. this morning when the argument began, they thought it was a 45% chance the government would prevail. As we speak, it's now down to 22%.
Is that going to matter?
Does the quality of an argument before the Supreme Court matter in a democracy that nominally follows the rule of law? I don't know. Like, what are we going to smoke as we go through this together?
Today on the show, Trump's tariffs got their day in court. What happens now? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks makes it easy to find the perfect gifts and holiday looks that suit your personal style. The holidays can be a whole lot of things. Fun, relaxing, but also a little stressful because you've got a long list of friends and family and you gotta find a gift for everyone. If you go over to Saks.com, I guarantee it's gonna jumpstart all of your ideas for what you should be getting your friends and family. It is the only website on the internet where you're going to find super high-end luxury Prada sneakers next to a crystal floral A-line gown from MacDougall. And then that's right next to a Cynthia Rowley ombre long-sleeved wetsuit. These are things I did not know existed until I went to Saks.com. And now I'm like, maybe I should be getting a bathing suit for my mom this Christmas. Maybe. Going into this holiday season, I feel confident Saks is there to help me find inspiration, curate a holiday wish list, pick out gifts for my loved ones, and have a look ready whatever might come my way. Whether it's an office holiday party, a cozy night in, or a vacation getaway, Saks has got everything you could want. If you're looking for shopping to be personalized and easy this holiday season, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to shop for everyone on your list.
The central question at the court yesterday was whether the president has the authority to implement his tariffs on his own, that is, without consulting Congress. This authority is being challenged by business owners and state attorneys general. Full disclosure, my husband has worked with those attorneys. He was actually one of the people watching the arguments in Washington. Anyway, the president says his authority flows from something called the International Emergency Powers Act, or IEPA. But even during court arguments, it was a little unclear what the emergency actually is here.
If you said there was something called the Emergency Powers Act and the claimed emergency is bilateral trade deficits, it's absurd on its face. If the emergency was fentanyl, we could possibly talk about it. If the emergency was national security, we could definitely talk about it. But there's no emergency.
Yeah. I mean, that's the first thing that was being argued, which is like, what is the emergency here that allows us to use the Emergency Powers Act to levy these tariffs? And I left that confused. After we deal with the, is there an emergency? There's the question of like, what is the tariff? And so what you saw was the Trump administration trying to make this argument that a tariff isn't a tax. The money we're raising here that's not the point. This is about regulating. It's interesting to me because I was listening to one of my colleagues, Dahlia Lithwick. She does a podcast here too called Amicus. She interviewed one of the plaintiffs in one of these cases that's in front of the Supreme Court. This guy who runs an educational technology company who imports stuff from China. He was estimating that the cost to his business from tariffs, the reason he's suing, $14 million this year. And I was like, you're trying to argue with this guy that it's incidental, that like $14 million bucks is being plucked from his business's pocket? That's crazy to me.
Oh, it's actually quite interesting. Again, I don't want to get too lawyerly because I don't do that. But when the argument was being had, the Solicitor General said, this is regulatory, not a tariff, because if the policy worked perfectly, no one would buy anything from abroad, in which case it would raise $0 of revenue.
And then the justices were like, well, then why not just ban imports? Like, then you wouldn't be raising any revenue.
Right, so therefore it's not a revenue thing. And one of the judges said, actually, the way you do that is with an embargo.
Yeah.
Why not do an embargo if that's what you want? Now, actually, the thing about an embargo is it's even more extreme. It would probably make that guy go broke, because if that guy's business relies on inputs from abroad and he can't get any of them, rather than just having to pay a 50% tax, you can think about an embargo as being an infinity tax or an infinity tariff.
Yeah.
And it would drive that guy even more broke. So the funny thing is all this futzing around is sort of weird, which is you could still damage the plaintiffs enormously. So again, this is one of those cases where lawyers argue because they have to, and because we do have to have a set of rules. We have to have people who interpret rules. But sometimes the distinctions they draw don't make a lot of sense when you think a little harder about the world.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that CEO said was, I think you have to think of this case like an 8th grader, which I thought was funny because he sells educational products. He's basically like, we fought a whole revolutionary war about taxes, y'all. And it was like a king imposed taxes. People got mad. 8th graders know about that. And that is the argument on the other side, which is basically like you're having a king impose taxes. And this is like the story of America. It's not what we're about.
And actually, one of the judges said this, and I'll get the quote wrong, but it was quite delightful. They said it wasn't a Boston embargo party. It wasn't a Boston regulation party. What we were worried about was the tax on the tea. Was that right? I never took ethics. I never took high school American history. Tea?
It was tea. Tea.
Is that why Americans still don't like tea? And also, why is American coffee so bad?
Okay. This is a whole other podcast. So we're not going to know how the justices rule for a while, but it seems to me like you and I would be doing the listeners a favor if we kind of updated them on where tariffs stand more generally at this moment, both in terms of how many have been implemented, how Donald Trump seems to be thinking about them, and how his colleagues in the Senate seem to be thinking about them. So I guess where would you start that?
So some people are saying, why aren't we seeing catastrophic effects of the tariffs? You guys have been talking about it for 8 months now, but actually they've only been in for 2 or 3. and we're not currently collecting government data. So the reality is this ongoing soap opera meant that we haven't had a fully installed tariff regime. We now have one. So high tariffs around the world, typically around 15%, sometimes higher, sometimes lower. The average from the think tanks who calculate this stuff is around about 18%, with a whole lot of carve-outs. And actually, if you look at the tariff revenue coming in, it's well below the tariff rates, suggesting that the carve-outs might turn out to be a really big deal, including one that has Canada. Most goods we import from Canada are coming in at zero because Trump forgot that we have a free trade agreement with them. So whenever he raises the tariffs on them, it's only on a small subset of goods.
So what's getting carved out? Canada, it sounds like. What else?
Canada, and then there's a whole lot of guys turning up to the White House.
Individual industries.
So that's a story still yet to be told. The other thing is, they're not always on. Like, remember, Trump imposed 100% tariff on China on a Friday, then tweeted, "Just kidding," by the following Monday, and then went off to China and agreed that he was not going to impose the tariff that he'd not imposed. So there's a lot of stuff that hits headlines but never actually becomes policy.
So it's just chaos.
So that China 100% tariff was going to be in a couple of weeks' time. Now it's not, because Trump agreed with Trump that Trump would not make Americans pay higher taxes to bring stuff in from China.
Well, and Donald Trump would couch that as a success, I guess. Like, I had a negotiating point and I was able to
With himself.
make some moves here because of the tariffs.
So just to be clear, Trump flew to Asia to cut taxes that America imposes on Americans. You can actually do that from the comfort of your own home. So look, there's another whole podcast, What Happened in China.
Yeah.
The short answer is that Trump managed to make things better this week than they were last week, yet still far worse than they were on January 19, the day before he became president. And another short version of this is the Chinese got a lot and the Americans not very much.
So Trump isn't improving things for Americans. He's improving things for himself, I guess.
He's making things less worse than he did when he was at his most impulsive. He's undoing his own messes.
It's worth noting, too, that there's been pushback to the tariffs in the Senate, right? There have been these votes.
Isn't this amazing? I discovered, did you know we have a Senate?
I thought Congress was like, school's out. Now, I mean, the House is not going to take it up or vote on it, so it's a little bit stuck. But we did see senators say, hold it, no.
4 or 5 Republicans crossed and they said, we don't want these ridiculous tariffs. And they started small and they've gotten bigger. And it's absolutely clear a majority of the Senate thinks most of the Trump tariff agenda is nonsense and they don't want it. So fantastic that we have a Senate. Really good news. You just said the House. Do we have one of those?
Yeah, no, not right now.
So nothing's actually changing. It's just the Senate saying we think this is a bad idea. By the way, we actually know what the House would do. This whole Supreme Court case is Trump says, I want tariffs, and he refuses to talk to the House, and it's because he knows he cannot get through his tariffs. We can have all the tariffs you want. You just have to win an argument. You have to win it in the House and the Senate. And he's refused to even engage in any part of that argument. He's gone running to the Supreme Court before he's bothered to call Mike Johnson and say, hey, how about we try and pass this? Let's see if the American people like it. The truth is, the Senate doesn't want it, the House doesn't want it, and the American people don't want it.
So, okay, we have the House, the Senate rethinking tariffs maybe, or maybe thinking about them for the first time because they really weren't called on to be part of the tariff decision-making in the first place. You have SCOTUS very, very skeptical. I just don't think, even if the president loses in court, I don't think the tariff idea is going away. The guy loves tariffs. He talked about it on the campaign trail a lot. So what is like the next step here?
Really important question. And it's important that people understand. So for everyone who's been worried that we've gone through a tumultuous, crazy, incoherent 8 months with tariffs, most of which are about to be ruled unconstitutional, the good news is that then we could go through a tumultuous, incoherent, possibly illegal new set of tariffs in response. So the Constitution's crystal clear. The ability to tariff rests with the House. The House has delegated limited authorities to the White House. So if this across-the-board thing is ruled unconstitutional, those other authorities still exist. So let me explain how all of this works, because it's a little bit unusual. So I think of this as having two dimensions. I call horizontal being tariffs across a whole country. The current Supreme Court case is, can you tariff a country? And I think the answer is going to be no, but we'll find out.
Are there vertical tariffs as well? They're like industry-based?
Right. So vertical is when you choose a slice of the economy, a specific industry. There is a different authority where he could levy tariffs of 15% for 150 days. He may or may not need to either inform or get sign-off from Congress, I forget. But it's only 150 days. And then, so that's probably what he'll do the next morning.
So a little smack across the nose for someone.
Yep. And then it'll go away. And then the question is, what he wants to do is use these as a cudgel against other nations. And he wants them to track broad swathes of imports because he wants revenue. So what he's going to need to do is take these vertical tariffs, these thin slices, particular industries, say...
semiconductors.
Right. And just raise, same way he has on electric vehicles. So electric vehicles have very, very high tariffs, about 100%. And there's a process, though, with most of these. So some of them, under national security, you can say, well, we need tariffs on tanks and guns. So there's a national security thing, and that moves pretty quickly. But I think there has to be an investigation. But most of it's going to be, we have to do an investigation for X months. X will take between 2 and 6 months. And we already have these investigations underway where you tell your people, I want you to figure out whether there's a big issue here, and they always come back and say yes, and then you get to impose a tariff on a particular good. And so we have those underway for pharmaceuticals. We already have them for steel and aluminium. I think there was something going on with copper for a little while.
Sounds like you're saying no matter what, we're on the tariff train. It's just a question of can we slow the tariff train down?
It's going to be uglier and weirder.
Yeah.
It's actually going to be less coherent. But
Fun.
If this has felt like a roller coaster of an 8 months, first of all, if the Supreme Court did nothing, the president seems to already show that even once he's imposed his tariffs, we still get a new news article every 4 to 6 days that he decides to do something to someone for some reason. China was the most recent one. So even though everything's settled, nothing's settled because that's his temperament or that's how he chooses to run trade policy. So if the Supreme Court rules it all constitutional, my forecast is the soap opera continues, maybe to slightly lower volume. If it's unconstitutional, he's just going to be throwing mud against the wall in every direction. And the only thing that is good is it'll be a really good time to be a trade economist or a trade lawyer or a trade lobbyist because those people will be wildly overemployed.
We'll be back after a quick break.
The warning signs are all around us. Record-breaking temperatures, extreme floods, wildfires, and other natural disasters. Animals like polar bears and whales vanishing before our eyes. And the Trump administration is making it worse, rolling back protections and sacrificing the planet that future generations will inherit, all for corporate profits. But when people come together, they can make an impact. Backed by 3 million supporters, NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, leverages the full power of the law to challenge corporations or government agencies that would illegally destroy our environment. They won nearly 90% of lawsuits they filed against the first Trump administration. Now, as their caseload grows, they need your support. Help stop oil and gas drilling in pristine wilderness, protect endangered wildlife from extinction, and safeguard our planet's climate for future generations. Make your gift today. Donate and your gift will be matched 5 times at nrdc.org/next.
This episode is brought to you by AT&T, the network that helps Americans make connections. When you compare, there's no comparison. AT&T.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
You know, you've made this really interesting point in the last few days that understanding Trump's approach to tariffs is kind of a skeleton key for understanding Trump's approach more generally. And I'm wondering if you can just tease that out for me in the next few minutes. Like, you basically said the way Trump approached SNAP benefits, first they're cut off, now they're back on, now maybe they're not on. It's the same approach he's doing with tariffs. So explain this a little bit, because it did unlock something for me.
What we saw with SNAP is the same as what we saw with tariffs, which is immense uncertainty, on again, off again, threatening of others, arguably bullying, and so on. I noticed the pattern, and then I tried to think what could cause this. I think the most obvious would be incompetence. Incompetence and poor advice means you threaten something today not realizing that it's illegal. And then you back off tomorrow, and then you forget the next day, and then one of your advisors oversteps and blah, blah, blah. That's theory one. Theory two is it's sort of a more complicated version of own the libs, which is, I could just cut SNAP off. Or I could just not give a shit. It's on today, it's off tomorrow. I don't really care because it's all just the freaking libs. If you think the libs are, and this is not quite right, but if you think that the anti-trade is MAGA, therefore the libs are pro-trade, it's not quite historically accurate, then I also don't care about the incoherence of my trade policy either.
I think you're onto something. I think I see something else, which is, and it was clarified for me by the arguments today, which is, the main argument was that a tariff is a regulation, which is silly and not true. However, I actually think in Trump's world, a tariff is a regulation. I don't think they like getting into the details, making agreements, coming to agreements, like sorting things out at a table, having a document. For them, it's just easier to kind of aim a fiscal gun at someone's head and be like, this is the regulation, my way or the highway, buddy. And I thought it was revealing, like there was truth in that. And that seemed to be like the commonality to me. Like, this is a regulation in Trump world.
Let me use a slightly different language while agreeing with you, which is these are instruments of power.
Yeah.
And there's no point having power unless you use it. Now, it appears that he doesn't actually have anything. The power of a SNAP, it's not clear what he wants to get out of it, but he's definitely keeping a whole lot of people who are very, very worried about their family's finances on the edge of their seat. And so it's not just having the power, it's showing that you have the power. I think this use of power over low-income and sometimes hungry Americans is disgusting. I think it's immoral, and I think it's not okay. Sometimes people call me and they say, what's the deep economic analysis of this? There's no deep economic analysis. These are people. They're people who are told that these are the rules of the game, that we have a social safety net, and if things aren't going well in your life, we will look after you. And it's being snatched from them. And they are being used as political pawns. And if there's anyone in this world who ought to be used as political pawns, it is not the downtrodden, and it is not hungry children, and it is not okay by me.
Do you think, after all this tariff stuff is said and done, do you think Donald Trump has succeeded in at least trying to redefine what a tariff is? Because it seems to me like that's kind of what he's trying to do with this Supreme Court case and in how he speaks about tariffs to the broader public. And to me, it seems like the real question at the heart of this case and the Trump project is whether he's successful at doing that.
Yeah, I think there's a failure and a success. I think he has lost the war of ideas by a huge amount. The Senate doesn't want them. The House doesn't want them. And roughly by a 2-to-1 margin, the American population doesn't want tariffs. That's actually quite remarkable because historically tariffs You get to use the xenophobic tax on China. Not quite true, but, they've been historically remarkably popular with the punters, just not with elites. But actually, he's even lost the punters. The punters hate, and punters, that's Australian for regular folks.
I mean, it was interesting to me. Yesterday, you saw Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, saying, all the people coming from New York to Texas, I'm going to do 100% tariff after this Mamdani election. And I was like, it just struck me like that was a really clear sign of like how the word tariff is being warped. It's just being seen as like a hammer.
Right. So I think the failure is he's lost the battle of ideas, which some of us think still matters. The success is if tariffs were a means to an end, and the end were to create Fortress America that was separated and less integrated from the rest of the world, that had fewer international conferences, that had fewer immigrants who wanted to come in, that had less exchange of goods and services, fewer exchanges of ideas, that was less a magnet for folks elsewhere, I think he succeeded enormously. We were so central to so many industries and so much of global discourse, and the world is going on without us, and we're a little bit the crazy uncle.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a success to me. I mean, like a success, but not a success.
But I think that's what the guy wants. The guy wanted a separate America. He wishes we were an island, and to a greater extent than we once were, we are.
If you're a business owner right now, having watched these tariff arguments and seen the last couple of days play out, how are you planning for, I don't know, Q1 of 2026?
The greatest failing of this administration is that every business owner across the country and every corporate board is spending all their time thinking about the White House. And they're doing that, and they're contorting themselves and their business models to meet the White House's whims rather than the needs of their customers or how to work better with their workforce. In a better world, business would be off doing business. And Trump has utterly dominated boardroom conversations. That may be good for the man's ego, but that's very bad for the American economy.
Justin, I'm really grateful for you. Thanks for coming on the show.
To you too, Mary. Thanks, man.
Justin Wolfers is an economist and professor at the University of Michigan. If you want to hear more about this case, I urge you to head on over to Amicus, Slate's podcast on all things SCOTUS and the courts. This week, Dahlia Lithwick spoke with the CEO of the small family business at the center of the tariffs case. He talked about what it means to stand up to Trump's monarchic power grab. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Paige Osburn is the senior supervising producer of What Next and What Next TBD. Mia Lobel is the head of audio here at Slate. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.